Hello YouTube, and welcome back to Samizdat Broadcasts, and the first installment on my series of the history, theory, and methodology of the regressive left, recent regressions. A thorough exploration of the theory and history of regressive, illiberal leftism in today's world is a massive project. I can't begin to cover it all here. What I offer is not a thorough, comprehensive explanation, but rather an introduction and perhaps some perspective. In this social media age, regressive leftism and the so-called social justice warriors came seemingly out of nowhere, appearing to both create and thrive off of chaos, dissension, and controversy. What I intend to show here is that the regressive left of the present day, while new and unique in some respects, is part of a tradition as old as Western civilization itself. What is new about it is that the English-speaking world, at least, has had, up until now, relatively little experience with authoritarian leftism in the modern sense. While Marxist-Leninist and Maoist groups have existed in the 20th century, and utopian communities can be traced back to, or even before the days of the French and American revolutions, they have not been significant forces in the politics of the United States and other English-speaking and European countries to nearly the degree that the politically correct social justice movements are today. This, I think, is a significant factor in their recent success. The liberal tradition in America struggles to cope with illiberal movements from the left because it has so little real experience with them. The revolutionary socialist tradition in America never really recovered from its Red Scare and McCarthy-era repressions. It's important to bear in mind that regressivism is not inherently left-wing, and leftism in America and Europe is not inherently regressive. Pro-free speech and anti-censorship voices in America and elsewhere have, for the vast majority of their history, come from the left against repressive forces on the right, and only very recently has the reverse been true. Had he been born at any other time in American or British history, Milo Yiannopoulos, for example, would have been a leftist. 10 times as much material could be written about the regressive right. The present-day hostility towards the far right seen in most American media and public discourse is the exception and not the rule historically. Most of the time, it has been right-wing thought that was tolerated and encouraged while the left was frowned upon, although the overall trajectory of social progress in the Western world has been towards greater degrees of liberalism. This is why I think the present-day regressive left is worth paying attention to. It advances under banners that historically have meant increased rather than decreased liberty, equality, and public accountability. This is what is so dangerous about it. There has been, at least as far back as the dissolution of the USSR, a tendency to see a greater threat in fascism than in communism, a greater willingness to censor material offensive to feminists and gays rather than material offensive to conservatives and Christians, and a greater willingness to condemn and punish the racism of the Ku Klux Klan, while remaining a bit more lax towards the racism of the Nation of Islam. It is acceptable to bash white males in mainstream media in a way that would be beyond the pale if done to women or minorities. At first glance, the rationale behind this seems solid. All things considered, the capacity of white America to oppress its blacks is greater by orders of magnitude than the capability of black America to oppress its whites. But as the recent rise of the latest incarnation of the regressive right, the alt-right, as represented by the likes of Richard Spencer, and the politically incorrect forums on 4chan demonstrate, white male America's tolerance with these kinds of reverse double standards is not infinite. This is especially so since the white male working class has been hard hit by recent structural changes to the economy, and the admonitions of white male privilege are increasingly ringing hollow to those who are themselves unemployed and down on their luck. No privileged check there. The surprising electoral success of Brexit, Donald Trump's bid for the White House, and the sudden rise of populist nationalism in Europe shows us that regressive leftism poses a dual danger to the Western world. Its own illiberal tendencies on the one hand, and the very real possibility of a regressive right-wing backlash to it on the other. It is therefore imperative that regressive leftism be seen and understood clearly, and this requires a look at its chief doctrines and the history of how those doctrines came about. The term regressive left entered the political parlance of our times in 2012, when UK parliamentary aspirant and author Maajid Nawaz used the term to describe left-leaning people who are reluctant to challenge bigotry and oppressive cultural practices that occur within minority communities, especially Islamic migrant ones, out of a fear of being labeled as racist or otherwise politically incorrect. This issue entered mainstream consciousness following Sam Harris and Bill Maher's heated debate with Ben Affleck on a 2014 episode of Real Time with Bill Maher.
Yeah. Well, liberals have really failed on the topic of theocracy. They'll criticize white theocracy. They'll criticize Christians. They'll still get agitated over the abortion clinic bombing that happened in 1984. But when you want to talk about the treatment of women and homosexuals and free thinkers and public intellectuals in the Muslim world, I would argue that liberals have failed us. And the crucial point of confusion, thank you.
Thank God you're here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the crucial point of confusion is that we have been sold this meme of Islamophobia, where every criticism of the doctrine of Islam gets conflated with bigotry toward Muslims as people.
Right.
And that is it's intellectually ridiculous. Even it gets
so hold on, are
racism.
you the person who understands the officially codified doctrine of Islam? You're the interpreter of that, so you can say, well, this is...
I'm actually well educated on this topic.
I'm asking you. So you're saying if I criticize you're saying that Islamophobia is not a real thing. That if you're critical of something...
Well, it's not a real thing when we do it.
Right.
Well, no,
it really isn't.
I'm not denying that certain people are bigoted against Muslims as people. And that's a problem.
Big of you.
But
why are you so hostile about this
concept? It's gross. It's racist.
It's not. But it's so nuts.
It's like saying those stateless, shifty Jew.
You're not listening to what
we
are saying.
You guys are saying if you want to be liberals, believe in liberal principles like freedom of speech, like we are endowed by our forefathers with inalienable rights, like all men are created equal.
Ben, we have to be able to criticize bad ideas. And
of course we do. No liberal doesn't want to criticize bad ideas.
But Islam at this moment is the motherlode of bad ideas.
Jesus.
So we have
That's
ideas
just a fact.
like blasphemy.
It is
an ugly
apostasy.
It is
one basic liberal
let me
principle
unpack
of
it.
tolerance.
Let me unpack it.
But not for intolerance.
No, of course not.
Debates over Islamophobia reveal deep-seated dysfunctions in the culture of Western leftism. Dysfunctions that have long and deep roots in the culture and history of Western progressive and radical thought, as we will eventually discover. The equation of criticism of the genuinely harsh and retrograde nature of Sharia law, or the social consequences of mass immigration, Muslim or otherwise, with racism, is now the signature argumentative tactic of the regressive left, with the term Afflecking now being used to describe it, based on the video we just seen. The obvious and correct response, that Islam is a religion, not a race, and that to use the moral shield of anti-racism to shield Islamic theology from scrutiny and criticism is not only disingenuous, but dangerous, naturally fall on deaf ears. It must be pointed out, of course, that a strong line of demarcation is needed between honest criticism of religious tenets on the one hand, and an attitude of bigotry and hatred towards adherence to the religion in question on the other. The former must be acceptable, the latter must not be. The ridiculous decision on part of the Southern Poverty Law Center to include Maajid Nawaz and anti-female genital mutilation activist Ayaan Hirsi Ali on a list of anti-Muslim extremists exemplifies what goes wrong when this distinction is not properly made. Maajid Nawaz has as impeccable of liberal credentials as anyone possibly could, and to put him and Ali on a list such as this is a sad triumph of political posturing and pandering to the base over philosophical principle. The incompatibilities of Sharia with the Western liberal tradition need not be elaborated on, I would hope, when it comes to women's rights, LGBT rights, secularism, civil liberties, and other indices of liberal thought. What we've seen of Sharia in action in places like Afghanistan under the Taliban, Saudi Arabia, the Islamic State, and the theocracy in Iran make it look orders of magnitude worse even than the United States religious right, which these same regressive leftists pull no punches in their criticisms of, and rightly so. In addition to this are the effects that mass immigration has on infrastructure and job prospects, especially for those already in the lower socioeconomic classes. While some immigration is a good thing for shoring up shortages of needed skills and population growth in nations with low birth rates, too much immigration strains infrastructure and social services, at least in the short term, and creates downward pressure on wages, especially for those already at the lower end of the wage-earning spectrum, usually immigrants, women, or minorities themselves. Migrant scab labor has had a long history of use in strike-breaking. Progressives have no business enabling any of this. Yet, because Muslims are associated with not having white skin and not being of European origin, figures critical of Islam, such as Bill Maher, Sam Harris, and Maajid Nawaz, are figures of controversy in Western liberalism. It is very telling that people like Linda Sarsour, a defender of Sharia law, are among the leadership of the U.S. women's movement's protests against Donald Trump. While I do not condone Donald Trump's boorish locker room talk regarding women, is the crudest of his admittedly embarrassing pubescent-level machismo really worse than the tenets of Sharia that severely circumscribe the life of women in a way that would make Trump's cringe-worthy faux playboy persona appear enlightened in comparison? Another of this Women's March leaders, Donna Hilton, served 27 years for the kidnapping, torture, and murder of a 60-year-old homosexual man. Politically motivated refusal to face hard truths regarding the immigration policies in Europe has had devastating consequences, as the Rotherham child sex exploitation scandal, the 2016 New Year's Eve attacks, the migrant crisis of 2015, and a painfully long list of Islamic terror attacks in Europe from 2014 to the present exemplify. More tragic still is how politicized the issue has become, with progressives taking a defensive stance vis-à-vis Islamic mass immigration. This is especially bizarre and vexing in the case of the sexual assault cases, like Rotherham and the Cologne attacks. As the recent Me Too campaign exemplifies, regressive leftists do not hesitate to sympathize with feminist demands that we listen and believe when women come forward with allegations of sexual assault, and this well beyond the reasonable demand for a proper investigation and into the realm of guilty until proven innocent and abandonment of due process for the accused, as has been seen on some college campuses. Such measures, we are told, are needed to defeat rape culture, and we are assured that false allegations are rare and apparently excusable in light of how many guilty men go free. Apparently, however, these demands do not apply when the men being so accused are not white Christian citizens. Then, refusal to listen and believe is the surest way to avoid a potentially career-ruining accusation of racial profiling. As previously mentioned, anti-Muslim bigotry does need to be condemned, especially in light of the erosions of civil liberties, the expansions of domestic surveillance, and hawkish foreign policy stances taken by the Bush White House and carried on by the Obama administration in response to the threat of Islamic terrorism following 9/11. It is equally regressive to condemn the mentality of collective responsibility underlying feminist attitudes towards men accused of date rape on college campuses, while endorsing collective responsibility for all Muslim immigrants and refugees, as it is the other way around. Anti-Islamism should not be an impetus to embrace regressive politics in the West. But neither should very real and demonstrable acts of terrorism and violence against women, otherwise so staunchly condemned in progressive circles, be downplayed or swept under the rug out of white male guilt over Western colonialism or the Holocaust, and fears of being thought of as racist likewise be an impetus to the embrace of another kind of regressivism. Islam should no more be subjected to or shielded from the scrutiny that all belief systems should get. Both far-right anti-Islamism and the regressive left's willful refusal to countenance anything Islamophobic are twin paths into a future no liberal-minded person should be interested in. To be continued in Part 2, Senseless Social Justice.